Have a look at this. All these buildings, equipment, barrels are all needed to make whiskey.
So in this video, you're going to learn exactly how whiskey is made. When you understand whiskey more, it can make you enjoy it much more. It makes shopping for whiskey so much easier. So come with me, I'm going to go meet Rob, and he's going to show us the 5 simple steps about how whiskey is made.
It keeps its secrets about making its whiskey.
It's debaking germination and
There is this whole, cloud of mystery around this subject that just needs to be completely got rid of, dispelled, because it's the most simplistic process. And distillers and whiskey nerds don't like it when I do this, but I'm just going to break it down into its rawest form so that we enjoy whiskey without all the nonsense, shall we say.
Perfect. So you guys, by the end of this video, you know exactly how it's made and you can start making it yourself.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
So our journey doesn't actually start with all the steampunk equipment. It starts in the fields. Whiskey can actually be made with many different grains, but single malt whiskey specifically begins with one simple grain, and that's barley. So Cotswolds Distillery is actually in a really cool location. It's a location that's already well known for making great barley. So they have access to great barley fields in the area.
We work with one independent farm, so that's Aikman Street Farm, owned by the Green family. Been farming it since 1878. So the distillery is about making single malt whiskey using locally grown barley, create big flavours. That's it.
Malting is interesting. So basically, they soak the harvested barley so it thinks it's spring and it starts to sprout to release all these sugars, because eventually it wants to be a plant.
And what that allows it to do is just basically encourage the grain to create all of those nice enzymes and starches that can then be converted into sugar.
So in a nutshell, the word malt is just putting it in water and then you're drying it.
That is basically it. You're steeping it, you're soaking it, so you're making the barley think, right, I've had a really cold, wet winter, and now it's getting warm and it's getting sunny, and like all of us, you start to loosen up and open up, and you start creating all of the elements that will give you the energy to then, in theory, sprout into a plant.
But whiskey makers, they want the sugars from the barley, but they don't want it to turn into a plant. So what they do is they use hot air to stop it in its tracks.
So you guys stop it.
Yeah, basically. I'm happy that you want to be a plant, but I'm not going to let you. You're going to be a whiskey instead. It's quite brutal when you really think about it, isn't it?
They want to follow their dreams of being a plant, but you're going to be a whiskey, which I think is just so much better.
Well, let's go and have a look at how we're going to crush their dreams even further.
So Cotswolds use hot air, but you may have heard of something called peaty whiskey, and this is where it gets its smoky flavour from. Instead of using hot air, they burn this thick soil called peat, and then they use the smoke to dry it instead of that hot air. But if you want to know more about that, go watch my Smoky Whisky Explained video. So you've got your malted barley, and then they take it to Cotswolds Distillery, and then they grind it up in a mill.
And one of the big things about milling is you trying to get access to those sugars. And so you can't just have a whole barley husk in hot water because you won't be able to get it. But you don't want to flour because you're just going to be making bread. So if you use a mill, and it's a stone mill, and that's what we've got here, because it says the mill.
Who would have thought?
You come in from up there, drops the barley into the mill, it will go through the mill, and we've got grist. And like I say, it's not whole barley husks, they're chipped down so that the hot water can access the sugars easier. Ready to go into the mash tun, which is where we're going as well.
Great.
And then they mix up this grist with warm water in this big steampunky looking thing called a mash tun. And this makes this kind of sugary soup called wort, or as Rob likes to call it,
is essentially make Horlicks. And we're just making a hot, sweet barley water so that we can extract sugar. And that's what the wort is doing, just pulling sugar out. We'll drain it, so as you can see, it's just like a big sieve or colander. We'll let it sit so that we can have a clear wort. And clear wort is important for us making a fruity spirit, and we pump it into our fermentation tank.
The next bit is strange. We now want to add an actual living organism to this liquid.
Please step into my nightclub.
Quite the vibe, this one.
Definitely have fun here. It's about taking that hot, sweet wort, adding yeast, and we add 2 yeasts.
Okay, this is the crazy part. This is where we add yeast. It's an actual living organism. It's all around us. It's used to make things like sourdough bread, but it's also needed to make whiskey.
Efficiency of alcohol.
Yeah.
So that's what Anker's going to do.
Okay.
And then Fermentus is a Belgian yeast, and that will help us create lots of esters and funk.
So yeast has a sweet tooth, and its favorite thing to eat is sugar. And we just made this sugary drink, so it eats all the sugars from this malted drink, but this is where its superpower comes in. It eats the sugar, but then it poops out alcohol. Yeah, or what people like to call fermentation.
Esters, fatty acids, compounds that will create banana bread and papaya and pineapple and all these big fruity flavours that we need in the wash.
I actually get this question sometimes where people say, where do you put the bananas in the whiskey?
Yeah, I've had that before, genuinely.
That's not how it works, right? It's
Furthest thing from it. Like I say, we grow fruit in the Cotswolds, but don't use it in whiskey.
Yeah.
But you start creating those compounds and those flavour profiles in the fermentation. And now we've made a really weird beer. Imagine if you got a wheat beer and you sort of half finish it and then you leave it outside and you come back in like 2 days and you're like, oh God, that smells really weird.
But there's a problem. We've made this kind of distiller's weird beer, which is around 8% alcohol. But if you've ever seen a bottle of whiskey, it's 40%, 46 and beyond. But because of the byproducts of the yeast, eventually it actually starts to kill itself. So there's a cap on its ABV. So how do we bring the alcohol percentage up? And that's where we need these enormous steampunk looking pots, or pot stills.
So this is a 10,000 litre wash still, but I guess if you really want to simplify this down, it's a kettle. They're big kettles, they boil things, and instead of letting the steam go out the top, we capture the steam, or the vapour. Alcohol boils at 78 degrees centigrade, water boils at 100 degrees, so the first amount of steam or liquid to come off here will be alcohol, and that's what we're doing. We're just extracting the alcohol from the beer, the weird beer.
So if you didn't catch that, alcohol evaporates before water. A pot still doesn't create alcohol, it concentrates it into a thing called a condenser.
The steam will hit the condenser, which is lots of different tubes lined with cold water, and that will hit that, turn it back into a liquid.
So in single malt whiskey, the two condensers you may hear about are the worm tub condensers, like Craig Gallagher used, and the shell and tube condenser, which is what Cotswolds is using, which is basically like all these pipes, so the vapors go into it, where it gets turned back into a liquid, called your low wines.
That is called the low wines, up to about 20-25% alcohol.
We do have a little problem here. This process we've just done only gets up to around that 20% alcohol, but that's why they distill it again in a spirit still.
We'll move it on to Fanny. This is Fanny. She's our spirit still.
Hey, Fanny.
She's 7,000 litres, and we're going to take our low wines and we're going to boil it again.
And this is where we get the alcohol level up even higher by distilling it a second time. So most distilleries distill twice, and Cotswolds are the same, but some Irish distilleries distill 3 times, and some other distilleries use a completely different device called a column still. But if you want to go deeper into that, go watch my Distillation Explained video.
Spirit goes up, comes down, hits the condenser, and then...
So this crazy looking thing is called a spirit safe. And there's actually a little bit of history behind it.
You should have a big gold box here.
Yeah, so back in the day, you'd have a taxman on site on your distillery to make sure no one was like dipping in, having a little cup of new make to walk home with, or worse. And so the taxman would have locks on, and they would be the only ones that have access to the keys. They're still built in this traditional way, but yeah, you don't have to have locks on them anymore.
So its job is to select which part of the liquid spirit you actually want to keep, because depending on which liquid you decide to keep, whether it's more from the start or more from the end, will actually give you different flavors.
You talk about cutting, so you've got heads, hearts, and the tails. Cut points, like when you're going to cut to hearts, when you're going to cut out. It sounds like a really scientific process. It's basically this. Heads for 7 minutes, and then when we hit 75% alcohol at 7 minutes, this is what a cut looks like. That's it.
It's pretty complicated.
Tricky science stuff here.
But what's crazy is when you're selecting for it to go to the heart, that can affect the flavour of a whiskey doing that.
Massively.
Yeah.
Hugely, yeah. And then we'll pump it into this, our spirit tank, and we'll have multiple batches in there.
Will you do the vatting?
Yeah. So we'll put like 2 or 3 distillations in there instead of just one. Not only does that encourage more consistency, we can fill a multitude of casks in a quick manner. So this is what it looks like before it goes in a barrel. So you cannot transfer colour through distillation. Whiskey actually gets all of its colour from the barrel, or it should get all of its colour from the barrel. This white pheasant is 63.5%, and this is the only spirit that we make, so it's really, really fruity. Just all of those wonderful big, like grape pulp, chocolate, cereal, funky kind of like charred pineapple aromas and flavours.
That's actually quite drinkable. Really good, isn't it? I normally expect, you drink new make, you think, okay, it's going to be rocket fuel. But no, you've already got the fruit.
We're already preloading as much flavour as possible in the fermentation, select cut points, even down to the waters and the wort. If you've got good going into the best quality first fill casks, so good into good makes good. And then it's literally just a case of roll your barrel onto here. You're going to put this in. You're filling a barrel like you would your car at a petrol pump. You're done.
All right, let's go to the next stage.
Let's go see some sleeping barrels. This is just the best room in the world. Best room.
I'm excited. Straight away again, the smell. I wish you guys could all smell that you're getting right here.
I have been here for 8 years. I come in this room 3 or 4 times a week. I never get tired of this smell. Yeah. It is the best smell in the world. So this is one of 4 warehouses that we use for aging whiskey. All of our warehouses are within 5 minutes of the Cotswolds.
Barrels play a huge role in shaping the flavour of the whiskey, so distillers can choose different types of casks which will impart different flavours onto that new make spirit. There are 2 types of cask used within single malt whiskey that are by far the most popular. They are the ex-sherry cask and the ex-bourbon cask.
30% of what we fill are these bourbon barrels. What is a bourbon barrel? What is a barrel? Why is a barrel used in whiskey?
Yeah, why not just put in a steel or a plastic thing?
Exactly. I mean, one of the reasons that bourbon barrels are used is because they can only be used once in Kentucky, and then after that, the Scotch whisky or the world whisky scene takes them. But you want all of the elements of the barrel to impart onto it. So you want all of the lignans, all of the vanillins, you want the fresh char to act as a filter. You want to put it in a breathable vessel. And that's what it is. Oak will breathe. So it'll breathe the spirit into the grains and it'll breathe it back out, allowing the spirit to extract all the flavour profiles, oxidize, mature.
How does it breathe though? It's just sitting there, it's just still.
Temperature, especially, hot versus cold, winter, summer, day, night, light, day. It's cold, it's tight and it's closed up, like us. And then when it's warm, it's loose and it's open and it's vibrant, and that's what it's doing. It's just breathing, and all of that is imparting on the spirit as it's going. So again, it's just letting the Cotswolds climate do its job on the aging process as well.
Now, normally the next most common cask is the sherry cask, but Cotswolds specialise in this fascinating cask called the STR cask.
40% of what we fill are these red wine barrels that we call STRs.
This is something I find a lot of people get confused over as well. There's STR cask. Is that a type of wine? Is that how's that different to an ex-bourbon barrel?
Red wine STR barrel was developed by Dr. Jim Swan, and what his rationale was is that there are more and more world whiskey distilleries coming into fruition. The demand of whiskey barrels or barrels used within whiskey come from 2 places: Kentucky in America from bourbon barrels, and Jerez in the south of Spain for sherry barrels, bourbon and sherry. You do get little pockets elsewhere, but they're the 2 main. Sherry casks are getting more expensive. Bourbon's still a powerhouse, but more and more distilleries need it. There is actually quite the demand. What about if you were to use red wine barrels? Wineries always struggle to find a place for their barrels after they've used them, but red wine can have a sulfuric live element on the inside of the barrel. So unless you're making a really peaty, robust, meaty style of spirit that really likes that, it's really difficult to use red wine barrels consistently because your whiskey could sulfur or it might not. So you've got a barrel that is readily available, and if you were to put a process on it, then you make it not only readily available, but also you can extract all the good elements of a red wine barrel and none of the bad. And that's what an STR is. Shaving out the interior to take it almost back to a virgin oak cask. So you still got red wine, it's just not on the surface. Put an indirect flame in the middle, and that will caramelize and toast the interior of the barrel, caramelize the sugars from the American oak and the red wine, and then you put a really heavy char. You set the interior of the barrel on fire. So when you enter a spirit into the barrel breathes in and breathes out, it'll go in and it'll extract virgin American oak, which will give you all that like banana, caramel, coconut, toffee flavor, red wine for your red fruit, caramelized sugars from the toasting that'll give you loads of natural sweetness, and then a char which will act as a filtration point and give you loads of natural color. So you got all the benefits of red wine barrels, virgin oak barrels, American oak barrels. So for New World whiskey, this isn't smoke and mirrors. This is just being able to really develop your style and your flavor in a short amount of time, consistently. And that's all you could ever want. So this 500-litre sherry butt.
So sherry is a type of fortified Spanish wine, and it brings flavors like spice and nuts and dried fruits and that sort of thing.
This is from our producer in the south of Spain, Miguel Martin. His family were sherry producers, but now he uses all of his bodega to create sherry to season barrels for whiskey.
You get in your STR casks, ex-bourbon casks, and then you get in sherry casks, and they're all going to give you different flavors.
Completely different, yeah.
Just by what type of barrel it's in and what was in before it.
Who previously was in the barrel, so to speak, the previous occupant of the barrel.
Yeah, it's like you move into a flat and the previous owner's been a smoker or something. And this is still there.
Not as gross. No, that's a really good analogy because we actually have a cask that embodies that analogy. So these are ex-week quarter casks. So essentially, yeah, the previous occupant was a smoker and we've just moved in and we're all fresh and fruity and bright and new. Yeah. And we've got to figure out how the two can work together.
Time for the practical takeaway, how everything we've covered will now help you pick your next whiskey.
From fields through to Horlicks, weird beer, boiled up vodka, put it in a barrel. We have now 100% full-term aged, beautiful, delicious, fruity, single malt whiskey from the Cotswolds.
This is what's really cool about tasting the whiskies now is I think a lot of people when they go to a whiskey store or they see a whiskey shelf, it's overwhelming, it's confusing. Even within the same distillery, we have 5 whiskies here and we're going to see how they can taste so different, and that's going to be through the different things we looked at today,
again,
the processes.
The whiskey that we always talk about the most is Signature. I know that you've talked about it on your channel before. It's this whiskey right here. 70% red wine STR, 30% first fill bourbon, aged full term and separately, and then 12 weeks before bottling, bring them together in a tank, and then marriage.
Yeah, I love this one. There's a reason why I've talked about this on my channel, but it's fruity, it's just so approachable, it's got the complexity there. And it's cool to see, like, seeing those 2 different casks and actually here they are, but this is what it's done.
Because we have our core range, which always starts with Signature, and then we have cask expressions in sherry, bourbon, peated, and red wine STR. And then this is the first fill bourbon. This is one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, wow. You're getting the fruity from the spirit, but because you're not getting different casks, that first fill really is coming through at the same time.
And that's what I love about bourbon casks, is you can't get anything else except our distillery character. So this is the peated cask. This is the moving into a flat and the previous occupant was a smoker, which I'm never gonna get rid of. Full term aged in 125 litre American oak quarter cask. Ooh. But what you're gonna love about this is it's peated cask, not peated malt. So the nose to the palate disparity is huge.
Oh yeah, more peaty on the palate? Is that what you're...
Loads. Smoke, bit of peat, bit of salt, bit of pepper.
Isn't that crazy? We saw that little peated cask and it's just completely different.
Sam Simmons once said this, he said, the New Make Spirit is your voice and your cask expressions are the different conversations and different subjects you can talk about. You're not going to talk about politics the same way you talk about motor racing.
But I do think if you just learn that little bit more about whiskey, and I hope you have from this video and with the help of Rob, that it really helps you explore more.
The biggest anomaly in whiskey is yourself. Yeah. Your palate, your perception of the flavour, how you define it, and then as you grow and your palate grows and how it changes, the whiskey doesn't change, you do, and it's your own perception. So it really is just like, sometimes if you go, no, I hate whiskey and I never want to drink it because you had a bad experience, just check back in. You changed, the whiskey didn't. Yeah. But not for the worse, it's for the better.